Director Rojas, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm here.
Okay, we got you. We got Councillor Seymour Fagan is back. So can I ask you to, starting on page 106, walk us through your budget, please?
Thank you. So again, so on page 106 is the start of the engineering and corporate assets budget, and it goes to page 117. So the engineering and corporate assets division consists of 6 groups listed on page 106 and 107. So corporate asset division, led by Adam Found, essentially is in charge of the city's asset management plan, the long-term budget, the capital budget process, and any related rate studies, such as the capital charge, the DC, the water user rate, sort of heads up that division. Development engineering group is led by Christina Sisson, and that they're responsible for all private development within the city. So site plans, plans of subdivisions, variances, consents, rezoning. This group works closely with planning to implement development. Third group, infrastructure design and construction, led by Corby Purdy. So these are road assets, so roads and bridges primarily, that need to be reconstructed or rehabilitated. We do both in-house design, in-house inspection, and in-house project management. We also utilize consultants where needed, but a large portion of the group, a large portion of the deliverables are done in-house. Fourth group, technical services group, led by Mike Farquhar. So this is various different aspects are in this group, anything from traffic engineering, traffic studies, corridor studies, life cycle management or life cycle extension of our roads, a gravel road program, road assets, categorizing road assets, and that could be anything from the sidewalk to the pavement condition, along with municipal drains. So municipal drains are a very unique form of infrastructure that's a great benefit to our agricultural community. Page 107. So then we have our crossing guard program. It's small but very valuable. Again, they provide safe passage for elementary school kids at 15 different locations throughout the city of Kawartha Lakes. That program is led by Lisa Pyman, who also is the engineering EA. And last but not least is the Kawartha Lakes Municipal Airport. We have an advisory body in the Municipal Airport Advisory Group that guides our decisions, but it is contracted out to Lumex on a multi-year contract. So that's the 6 divisions of engineering. Page 108 is budget to priorities. So we could have fulfilled pages and pages of it. But again, the first 2 are financial. So the asset management plan, the capital budget, and the long-term financial plan. Those sort of work in unison with each other. They inform each other, and they're very cyclical. The next 3 bullet points are all around development. Again, anything from infrastructure to review standards, to coordinating of application for the various development vehicles that the private sector have in order to build homes or build communities or commercial developments. The second last bullet is basically a road reconstruction. So again, lots of downtown projects in the last couple of years, Lindsay and Fenland being the most recent. Hopefully we do Omimi next year, again, waiting on funding. And then again, municipal drain infrastructure, even through the pandemic, we still had a lot of activity, and not only municipal drains, but in all capital and development. And that'll be evident a little further when we look at our revenues in the next couple bullet points here. So page 209 is our personnel breakdown. Only really one change in a additional position in the engineering group. If you recall in 2020, during the 2021 budget process, we identified two project managers positions that we were going to phase in. So one in 2021 under the infrastructure group and one in 2022 under the technical services group. So in that presentation last year, we identified them as project managers because we hadn't gone through the process of doing the job description and going through the job creation group. We have done that. And the title switched from project manager to supervisor, but it essentially is the same thing. So on page 110, you'll see highlighted in yellow, the supervisor technical services, also known as a project manager in technical services. And over to the left, there's a corresponding supervisor of environmental capital project management that was approved this year, for this year. So this is just part of our phase-in plan over 2 years. So page 111.
Director, I'm just going to stop you there. Councillor Dunn had a question on the sheets from page 110 about the supervisor of technical services. You did reply to you did supply a response. I'm just going to ask him if he's okay with the response or if he has any further questions.
Yes. There we go. Normally, a supervisor has some sort of somebody reporting to them. So I guess who did the job before we asked for the job, and does he have any direct reports?
So, yeah. So again, this is a preliminary. If you look at the corresponding supervisor of environmental capital, they have one senior engineering tech and one engineering tech flowing through. I didn't want to jump the gun on the org chart. We are looking at an engineering tech reporting to that supervisor of technical services and possibly a student or two. So that's the answer to your first question. Again, this is a new position. It was planned last year. Last year, 2 positions were planned, phased in. So this is just part 2 of that plan. And we have to sort of go through the HR process to see how it flushes out. So I anticipate that this will have at a minimum 1 engineering tech reporting to them, in addition to managing several consultants. Again, we do a lot in-house, but we can't do everything. So some of them will be managed in-house. The service levels. Again, this is traffic orientated, this position. As you're aware, there's a lot of traffic needs, anywhere from corridor studies to traffic calming to cameras to speed reductions. So we've seen an influx of these types of inquiries, and with growth, it's just going to get additional workload. In addition to that, we have proposed a master transportation plan that will align with the master servicing plan and the growth management strategy. The master servicing plan is budgeted in 2022, subject to council approval. So that's going to be a large undertaking. And again, with the various communities, especially in Lindsay, coming on board, the need to consolidate our traffic subgroup into one sort of focused position is becoming essential.
Okay, thank you. Will this position be in the bargaining unit?
Well, so again, we have to go through the HR process, but my anticipation is that it would be in the non-union group. Again, equivalent to the supervisor of environmental capital project management in infrastructure and design. We do have some good candidates in-house that are currently in the union that may be interested in this position as a progression to their skill set and their career within the city of Kawartha Lakes.
Thank you, Director.
Any other questions on that part for the director? Okay, keep going, Juan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we're at page 111 and 112. So similar to Director Stover, I will go through these in more detail with the respective business units. But this is an overview of our revenue and expenses. And again, on the bottom of page 112, we have a delta of 283,170, I guess, increase from the 2021 budgeted year. And I'll get into that explanation in the next couple slides. So even though we have 6 groups for accounting purposes, we broke them up into 3. So the main group, which is engineering and admin, essentially has the crossing guards included, and then the other 3 major service groups: technical services, infrastructure and design and construction, and development engineering, on this org chart, as can be seen on page 113. Again, with the 1 new position in technical services. So if we go to page 114, you can see the majority of the increases in this group, almost all of it. So the bottom right-hand side, you see 281,990. Again, that is, that is driven by that additional position under expenses, salary, wages, and benefits. So there is a delta of 347,403. So just for context, that's not the salary of the new position, but it includes benefits and other expenses. Also, the interfunctional adjustments, those, since we do a lot of in-house design, contractment, and project management, we do charge the capital for that service. It's embedded, whether we consult that out to a consultant for project manager or do it in-house, staff then charge their time accordingly. So I anticipate that 1.1 million in revenue or negative expenses would increase because that salary, that new staff salary would have charge their time to either capital or special projects. So it would be offset somewhat. I do want to highlight the revenue though, which is an extremely good news story. When you look at the actuals for 2020, we had a revenue of 377,995, so 378, which is our best year since I've been here. That's over the last 11 years. Our budget was around 250,000 for revenue. If you look at the actual budget for 2020, we estimated 250 and we came at 378. And even the last 5 years prior to that, we had budgeted anywhere between 150 and 250. We keep increasing it marginally every year, as evidenced by 2021. 2021, we budgeted 276,000. And as of, just give me a second, as of November, when I ran the numbers for 2021, our actuals are already at 335,000. So again, we've exceeded the 276, we're at 335. Not to be too eager, in 2022, again, we're increasing it to 283, but I anticipate that number is easily going to break 300, probably closer to 325 to 350. But again, we're being conservative to have an obtainable revenue source of 283. But if the past years are any indication, we should easily be above 350, which would offset some of that 281. So with the increased revenues plus the increased charge to capital, that 281 quickly comes down to about 150. But again, we want to be realistic and conservative when we do our numbers. Next page is corporate assets group, again led by Adam Found on page 115. Very lean group. The 116, we're essentially at the same budget as previous years. There's a slight increase of just under $3,000, but that's again, there's a huge efficiencies here, and where it's basically status quo. And then the last page is the municipal airport. Again, another great news story. If you look at the revenue, we've cracked 400,000 every year. Actually, the 2020 was 416. The 2021 budget, not the actual, was 416. As of November, when I ran the report, we were at 490,000 already. So the airport revenue is phenomenal, and that's a combination of fuel, facility rentals, and parking fees. So again, we're at 490 already in 2021. Again, to be conservative, we've increased it a little bit to 251, but I anticipate we'll be, I'm hoping we break 500,000 next year, but that's, fingers crossed. So the airport budget is by far the best. We're in a surplus. If you recall a few years ago, say 2016, 2017, we were running at about $80,000 deficit. In 2020, our actuals were about 25,000, 26,000. 2021, we anticipated a deficit of 45,000 in 2020, and we came in at 25, which is good. 2021, we anticipated a deficit of 40,000. We're really close to breaking even, within 5,000. So that's good news. Again, being on the conservative side in 2022, we're estimating a deficit of, we're anticipating a break even, or a surplus of 1,648. Delta from 2021. But in reality, I think we're going to be closer to the break even, within 10,000 anyways. But again, it's a great asset that is worth its weight to the city. We've looked around, and no one else has a municipal airport that's this sustainable, which again is a great news story. And I believe that's the end of my slides.
Thank you, Director. While we're on the airport, I'm curious with some of your comments there. If we have an abundance of revenue, over budget for revenue, where does that extra revenue go? Maybe a question for the treasurer. Does it go into an airport reserve for future expenses, or does it just go into our general reserve?
Through you to you. The airport has a motion right now, back in 2016-17, where if any surplus is earned in the airport over the budgeted amount, it goes into an airport reserve. However, at that time, they were running deficits in the 80,000 amount. So we're just, they have had a surplus in the last 2 years. They budgeted for a deficit. They came in a little lower, but still a deficit. So I've been working off the deficit that they had when it initially started. And so if this is true, that this will be a surplus, hopefully we'll get some money into the airport reserve this year.
Which would help to offset any future
Exactly.
expenses for the airport.
Exactly.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Helmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering if it's appropriate to give you a motion that we increase revenues for the engineering group under administration and engineering, that we bump it up by 50,000 and we bump up the airport by 20,000. Because while I appreciate Director Rojas being conservative, I think he's being ultra conservative, and by bumping up the revenues, it would, I think, be more realistic. Because if he's already at 390,000 on his budget for 2021, and he's only budgeting 283 for next year, and we don't see any reduced activity, we actually see increased activity. I think that splitting the difference would be something that we could live with.
I'm not even sure how we would do that. Change their budget. Director, treasurer, CAO? I don't know how, I mean, the airport, it wouldn't make sense to increase it because you're almost breaking even regardless. So anything extra is going to go into an airport reserve, so why budget for a surplus? The other one, I get it, but I don't know. Do you have any direction on that, how we would propose that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's probably preferable than sort of arbitrarily creating sort of the targets, although I know we've got some assurance from one of the categories. Really, in essence, what ends up happening is this then goes to the bottom line, and then you dispose of it in a subsequent surplus when we bring the statements forward. So one of the options, and maybe it's for consideration at the end of the budget, is how you reconcile sort of those overall revenue side of things. So it may not, you probably don't need to do it per work unit, but you want to start to look at the overall operating budget and then work to the bottom line, I guess I could say. But changing them at this point is probably more problematic than doing it sort of more broadly for the whole budget.
Okay, as was pointed out to me at lunchtime, I'm not an accountant, but it seems to me that if we can remove expenses, we can add profit. I don't see why it's problematic. I don't see, you're changing the number. You're changing the goal. If we remove 100,000 from a budget someplace, then it comes off. So adding it actually enhances the budget from the point of view that if we want to get to our 4.5 target of 3% plus the 1.5% for the levy, then to me, whether you remove dollars in terms of reducing an expense or you add dollars in terms of revenue, you're accomplishing the same thing. And I don't see why changing a number should be problematic.
I think, any addition in revenue or surplus goes into our surplus, which we traditionally put into our reserves, which if we want to lower the tax rate, we use our reserves to lower the tax levy. So it's just doing it from a bigger picture perspective than picking away at a certain number that, the directors brought forward. It looks like we're going to be in good shape here. We're being conservative. So I would suggest, yeah, we can change the number, but whatever extra comes out of that is going to roll into our reserve, which in the future will just give a future council options to reduce the tax levy on their end. So,
And it would also...
which we've done in the past, right? In past years, so.
Would also reduce our tax rate for this year.
It would. And so would taking money from a reserve to reduce the tax rate would have the same from a surplus reserve at the end as well.
If Director Rojas had put forward his budget, and instead of $283,770 under the revenue column, he had come to us and it said $323,000. There would be no difference to us other than his bottom line would change by $50,000. But nothing would be different. It's just the timing.
Okay, what do you want to do? I'm not going to argue. So what is your proposal for a motion then?
My proposal is that we add to the revenue side of the administrative and engineering budget $50,000, and we add to the airport, to their user charges and fees, $20,000.
So on page 114, that the revenue line for administration and engineering be increased by 50,000. And on page 117, the municipal airport revenue line be increased by 20,000?
That's correct.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Elmsley, second. Second?
Yeah, I'll second for discussion.
Okay, second by Deputy Mayor O'Reilly. Do you want to speak to it, or you have?
I pretty well have. I mean, there's two ways to achieve your budget, to achieve a number in your budget. You either add to the revenue side or you subtract from the expense side. I'm proposing here that we add to the revenue side in order to accomplish that. And we're not taking anything out of anybody's budget. We're creating a target for them. And the director has already said he thinks that he is being very conservative in the numbers he put out. So I don't think I'm unduly stressing him in terms of how he has to perform next year, because I think he's going to reach that target with no problem.
Thank you. You want to speak to it?
I'll just be brief. I understand what Councillor Emily is saying, so we got that as an option, or if we want to, at 4.7, make an alteration on that, we can also, as mentioned by the mayor, take it out of the existing reserve. So it's 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other.
This is,
I know what you're saying, because when you put it back in, we're not taking it out of the reserves, but yeah.
thank you. Councillor Ashmore? Did you want to?
Thank you. Through you to the director. I had a question about the airport, if I could.
Just on this motion right now. All we're dealing with is this motion right now. You ask about, if you have a question, general question on the
Yeah,
airport,
so-
ask it after.
Would it give, okay, with this motion, would it give more funds for the airport, basically? Would it put more money in their reserves for work that's going to be needed around the airport?
No, we're budgeting more from a revenue perspective, so there'll be less of a surplus because we're budgeting more. Same thing. It's the same at the end. There's just more revenue. Did you want to? Go ahead.
Thanks to you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start with the second one, the airport. It really is a moot point because it's a circular sort of process anyways. The revenue will go to that reserve, will go to the subsequent year budget. So it's really at the pleasure of council how you want to account for the airport. On the engineering side, though, I still would caution, we want to target conservatively revenue. It's not always in our control, and we have had in the past, and I can speak to it from experience, areas like our planning fees, development fees, things that we're targeting, more often than not, it's out of our control. And so there's going to be many cases, unless we increase fees, that we reach those targets. So although I respect and appreciate that, the director is saying we have a 2-year trend where we're higher than those numbers, there's probably not a risk in slightly increasing the revenue. But all I was suggesting is that the same really, it's really out of our control beyond that. But if things go south, for example, next year, council will be looking to rely on that revenue target. So if the pandemic, I'll just use as an example, extreme case, limited our activity at the airport, we may not reach revenue. Now we're digging in as a deficit. So all I'm saying is that the revenue targets are meant to be conservative but achievable. And it's really for council to determine sort of where that sweet spot is, that's all.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll speak against the motion. Staff has sat down and put together a budget that they say this is the money that we expect to bring in. And they're being realistic, and they're saying, yeah, maybe we're lowballing it a bit, but it's what we expect to bring in. If we start to fool around with the revenue portions, I mean, we can take stuff out and it doesn't hurt anything because we just took it out and it doesn't change, it's gone. But if we say, okay, well, in order to get my tax level down to where I want, let's just go across the board and increase everybody's revenue by 50 grand because that's going to give us a balanced budget. The fact that we have to, when we go in at the end of this process and we've got a 4.58 and we're targeting a 4.5 and we take that 0.08 out of the out of our reserves to reach our 4.5, that's still controlling the budget. and it's also putting constraint on us, because we're less liable as a body to approve things, knowing that we just keep on increasing that tax rate. So obviously, I don't want to increase the tax rate, so I want to keep as many constraints on us as possible. So I'm voting against it.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, did you want to add anything?
No, I was just going to make a comment that, Councillor Emley's not wrong, but I just don't think this is the direction that we need to go.
Agree. Any other questions? I'll ask Councillor Elmsley to sum up. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I don't agree that when we take things out of the budget, we're not affecting anything. We are affecting things. We're actually affecting work that's not going to get done because we took the money out of the budget. Here's an opportunity where, in the director's own words, he's being very conservative and feels that he's going to beat this number, and we have an opportunity to bump it up slightly in order to achieve that. I think we're missing an opportunity here, and that really would do no harm to anybody and help us achieve our long-term goal of 4.5%. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Is everybody clear on the motion? Hey? Well, we're adding 50,000 on page 114. We're adding $50,000 to the total revenue number under budget 2022. So it'll be 333. I'm not an accountant either. 333,770 will be that budget number for total revenue, and we're adding 20,000, or proposing to add 20,000 on page 117 to the revenue, charges, licenses, and fees, bumping it from 451 to 471 revenue-wise, which will offset some of the tax levy. Councillor's argument that will offset some of the tax support required to balance the budget. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? 1, 2, 3. Motion fails. Okay. Any other questions? You had a question about the airport, Councillor Ashmore, for the director.
Yeah, thank you. Question through you to the director. We talked about this about a year ago. The airport's made a lot of great improvements. We've got great tenants, and the building's in great shape. Traffic is good. Fuel system is working, but we've got a lot of work to do around the perimeter of the property. The fencing needs to be replaced. We've got 30, 40, 50-year-old page wire fence. We have farmers that rent adjacent properties, and they're constantly fixing the fence. So fencing is not cheap, but we need to have it done pretty sooner than later. So I'm just wondering, have we built this new fencing around the airport into the equation for the next year or so? Because it's going to have to happen eventually to repair the exterior fencing around the airport.
Go ahead, Director. It's probably a capital question, but go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, it is a capital question. However, the fencing question has come up. There are some old post and wire fences around there, and the councilor is absolutely right. There are some of those properties are farmed. The farmers lease or rent the land. They're not the primary owner of the land. We have investigated going through the Alliance Fence Act through our clerk's department because there is, the fence benefits two parties. The farmer really more in the case of livestock farming. So we have investigated it. We've done some minor repairs, but again, we have to follow the Fence Line Act in order to assess the proper benefit. Again, it's not the airport that solely benefits. It's the land adjacent to it also receives a great benefit. But it would be budgeted in our capital should we need to expand our fencing.
Thanks. And the final question is, we used to have an airport board, but it's disbanded, is it not? So engineering looks after the airport 100%, or is it Public Works, or both? Public Works, isn't it?
It's engineering, but we have an advisory board now. There's not a board that runs the airport. There's just an advisory board that makes recommendations through to engineering. Okay? Any other questions, final questions for Director Rojas and engineering? and corporate assets? Sorry, I want to cut you short there. Seeing none? Okay, thanks, Director, appreciate it. Let's move to page 118, which is emergency services. Fire, paramedic, the police will go through, but we've pretty much already heard from them. So fire rescue services, Acting Fire Chief Jones, welcome, sir. I'll turn it over to you if you want to walk us through the budget. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. On page 119, starting, I'm just going to break it down into divisions, which will basically cover any of the bullets there. So we have the Fire Service Administration Division, basically provides overall leadership direction and planning for the fire service, make sure we're in compliance with the Fire Protection and Prevention Act. Our fire suppression services, responsible for the mitigation of all emergency and non-emergency responses involving risk to life and property. Our training division, responsible for the development and implementation of fire training programs to meet the NFPA standards. We have our fire prevention division, which is responsible for any public education, inspections, code and standards enforcement. Mechanical division, responsible for up to around 51 of our various vehicles. He's also responsible for any of our mechanical equipment, pumps, saws, any of that. He's all responsible for the maintenance of that. The emergency service, the fire department, we're also responsible for the emergency management program that we meet the provincial mandated requirements under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. It basically covers what our divisions do. At this point in time, I'd just also like to say thanks to all our full-time and volunteer firefighters and all our divisions, basically for the commitment during the pandemic challenges that we had over the year, training, response protocols, sufficient PPE levels, and even existing service levels as our buildings are closed to the public. They certainly have met the challenge and continued to meet the service level that has been expected by the citizens of the Port of Lakes. Moving on to page 120. As far as our budget opportunities, I guess that was covered under my last. Personnel breakdown, we had the addition of one AEA. I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like us to stop there, as we know Councillor Dunn had some questions in regards to that position.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Dunn on 121 had a question, just explain the rationale for the administrative assistant. I'll just ask if he has a follow-up.
I'm good, thank you.
He's good with that, thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, we'll move to page 121. So basically the only organizational chart, you'll just see the add or the addition of the administration assistant. On to page 122, our overview and our summary, just a few other things, our main issues for this year. Review of the master fire plan, and I'm sure you're all aware we have a modernization review that is ongoing at this time. To basically review those and put those together, as we still have an outstanding resolution to council in regards to some of our issues there and fleet and that kind of stuff. Certification of our firefighters to meet our NFPA standards. Something else that I've really added on there is our firefighter recruitment. We are, and it's a province-wide, and it's a lot like a lot of the hiring within the city, but our volunteer recruitment is way down. I think we're sitting at maybe 305 to 10 now, and we should be somewhere in the range from 350 to 400. That's a major concern for me, and I'm certainly looking to review our recruitment process in the new year to see what we can do to change that. So right down to the budget part of it, basically pretty much the status quo,
except for the new addition of the one AA. We do have some collective agreements that we need to continue with as far as the wage and benefits. That shows in their salary and wages. Material and supplies, basically, that's just our utility, gas, hydro, propane, anything that services our buildings. Contracted services, that basically covers snow plowing, any of our building maintenance, any equipment maintenance that's required. The other interfunctional ones, that was a dispatch. That's just basically between us and our dispatch service, there was an increase of $20,000 as they're added on a part-time staff there. So under our agreement with the police service, we are responsible for a certain amount of their staff. That's basically pretty much the end of it for us, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn has a follow-up question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief, for your report. On your recruitment, is that an HR issue or is that a fire hall issue? And I'll just flesh it out before you answer the question. I know of at least one young fellow that applied after graduating from Sir Sanford, never ever heard back from anybody. I'm just wondering where the issue was. I mean, he's since become fully employed doing other stuff, but if there's one, there's more than one. And I'm just wondering, is the problem at the fire hall or at the HR department?
Well, I don't want to blame anybody, but we do have some issues between HR and some things that we need to clean up. Apparently, Taleo was supposed to fix some of that, you know, when you applied online, you were supposed to get something back. I'm not 100% sure, but that's one of my things moving forward right in the first year before we start our spring recruitment process is to go through that and just see what the issues really are.
Thank you, Chief, and I'm sure COVID hasn't helped one little bit either.
No.
Yeah, and I'll just say, in dealing with Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, it's not unique to Kawartha Lakes. The recruitment of volunteer firefighters is a struggle in Eastern Ontario as well from other areas. So probably a combination of a lot of different things. Thank you. Any further questions for the acting chief on the fire department? Seeing none, thanks, Terry. Appreciate your time today. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move over to paramedic services. Chief Mello is there. Welcome, sir. Just get you to walk us through your proposed budget. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I had an issue with the computer just before this presentation, so I'm hoping everything's working okay now. I would direct council through you to page 23 of the budget book, and it's my pleasure to walk through a brief summary of the budget. Certainly the departmental overview is there. Council's fully aware of what we do, and I just would maybe provide a bit of an update. We're running with 44 full-time advanced care and primary care paramedics and a complement of part-time staff to support them, and guided by two divisions, operations and professional standards. They're running now at approximately 22,000 calls for service annually, about 12,000 of those responses urgent or life-threatening 911 calls. So a response about every 43 minutes for a life threat. So incredibly busy. Those call volumes are increasing annually at a rate above what we had predicted in the past, and actually above or close to and a little bit above what was predicted in the master plan council received recently. In terms of the budget priorities, again, they're there. As council will see, our top priority here is to maintain sustainable core services that meet the needs of the community as we face this increasing service demand, and of course, as we come through now 2 years in the pandemic environment. It's a budget that I firmly believe allows this paramedic service to meet the service demands and meet the legislation or legislated requirements that the city of Kawartha Lakes has to the province as a designated delivery agent for land ambulance services, and those are set out by the Ambulance Act, as you're aware. This budget has also been developed with consideration of some ongoing staffing pressures that are currently plaguing all healthcare system sector, but certainly the paramedic services across Canada and here in the city of Kawartha Lakes. And finally, this is, I believe, a budget that's been developed with a lens of pandemic recovery and preparedness for the paramedic service. So those were key priorities going into this budget. If I could turn the attention to page 124. As council can see, this budget for the paramedic service is basically status quo in terms of staff positions. We added an additional staff in 2021. That was a staff member or superintendent that focuses attention on staff training, development, and wellness. The paramedic service master plan does indicate a need for additional paramedic services in the early phase of the master plan. And I would predict that that's something that I will likely be coming back to you in 2023 to consider as we look at the call volume growth. I mentioned we do have current staffing pressures, and these pressures are mostly related to the inability to call in staff to fill the short-term absences in the deployed ambulances. Recently, our negotiated collective agreement is going, some provisions within that, I believe, will give us some relief going into 2022. However, we have, you'll see in this budget, included adjustments for increasing impacts of overtime. And that's in the budget that's here for you to consider. But we have not added any additional staff in this current budget. So if I turn your attention to page 125, again, the organizational chart remains unchanged in 2022. I just will note that council will have heard about additional community paramedic resources, and I hope to be providing a report to council soon on that. That is not included in the organizational chart, as those are temporarily funded, 100% funded positions from other sources. So I'll soon be able to discuss with you the recently announced long-term care community paramedic program, which sees $5 million over the next 2.5 years for some positions within the community paramedic wing. Those aren't included in this budget report because they are 100% funded by the province, have no impact on the municipal levy. Hopefully, though, when I say no impact, I hope that these programs will have a mitigating effect to the call volume growth. So hopefully it'll help to stabilize some of our budget pressures going forward. In the end, it's a status quo budget in terms of positions. Now turning to page 126 for the overview of the budget summary. Council will see in the budget summary that we have included an increase of about $719,000, which is offset by revenue of nearly $300,000, which is increased. So a net tax supported increase of $437,000. This is driven by 3 areas, and I'll go through those briefly individually. If I start off with materials and supplies, you'll see a moderate increase. I think it's about 2.3% when you look at the dollar figure increase over our previous year's spending on equipment and supplies, mainly driven by increased usage because of call volume increase, the different equipment required by the pandemic, personal protection, protective equipment, et cetera, and also inflation and some supply chain concerns. So we see a moderate increase there. The interfunctional adjustment has risen by about $150,000. As a grant-funded department, services such as HR, IT, finance, facilities, those services provided by the city need to be charged back through my department in order to have the grant-funded budget pay for that rather than full cost on the municipal tax levy. So you'll see an increase there that comes into line with the actual services we're receiving. The largest part of the budget increase is related to salary and wages and of course benefits. Included in this increase is an adjustment for the full addition and annualization of that superintendent position I was talking about that we put in last year. That's included in the salary increases. We've also had the negotiated collective agreement. So there's been an increase that there's been an increase in the wage rate that drives this area up. And finally, as I noted earlier, there continues to be significant staffing pressures for the service. And as we went through navigated this pandemic world, there's been a lot of difficulty in filling some of those short-term absences, and previous provisions in the collective agreement result in us moving to overtime quite often to try to keep the ambulances on the road. So the adjustment to the overtime is actually to, I guess, bring that overtime line into reality. We've been overspent on it in the last couple of years, so that has brought it up. I know Councillor Ashmore had a question regarding this increase, and I guess I'll finish up and summarize, and maybe I'll ask if I've answered the question. But I think I'd also like to ask council when they're deliberating on this budget to maybe look broadly at the fiscal performance of the department over the last couple of years. When I was brought into CKL, one of the tasks I was given was to look at the gaps between the budgeted amounts and actual spending over the last few years, with expenditures being significantly above. There's been a lot of hard work by this leadership team, and I believe we've addressed those issues. Our 2021 budget is projected to come in on track to be on budget. And I think this 2022 budget sees the adjustments that make this a more stable, realistic, and fiscally responsible budget. So I'm hoping that answers Councillor Ashmore's question. I'd certainly be open to any others as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you. I asked some questions, and actually, kind of what I'd like to sort of point out is that when I'm looking at it here, we're going to be, it's going to cost us, it's cost us $700,000 more since we've entered into this shared services agreement, and kind of a nice way of saying a merger. So what I'm asking through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Chief is, if we're going to do this, are we going to do it right and perhaps have Peterborough ambulances serve us and we go back and forth? Because the way it is right now, we're not making any money on it. We looked at it, and the merger is not saving us any money. In fact, it's costing us more money, and it's costing us close to $500,000 more this year. So really, from what I see, with all due respect, it's not working out. So you'll have to sell me on this merger as to why it's working, in your opinion.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Chief. Go ahead, Chief.
I guess this is a point where I think I would respectfully disagree with the statement that it's costing us more. Again, if we look at the history of this budget over the last few years, you'll see that it has stabilized. The increases that are there are not associated with the shared service agreement with the County of Peterborough whatsoever. Those are related strictly to the cost of the negotiated settlement for the wages and some overtime. We're moving into 2022 with, and I guess I'll back this up one more notch. Through the pandemic, there's been a lot of work between the two services to find operational efficiencies, work together, procurement of some of the personal protective equipment, the sharing of strategies to get them implemented. I think, boldly, I would say that the shared service arrangement probably kept our heads farther above water through the pandemic than we may have been without it. Moving into 2022, as I've reported in the master plan, there's a strategy to continue to look at deployment of ambulances along our borders to do a better job, more efficient job, to try to probably avoid some of the increasing requirements for salaries going forward, increasing positions. We're continuing to look at and hoping to do a great deal in 2022 with the two municipalities to bring together their purchasing staff to look at joint opportunities to acquire equipment and resources. It's 1 year into this, and 1 year during a declared disaster or emergency in the province. So I think it's helped us to get through that. And I think we're still looking at many opportunities going forward in both the deployment strategies and some of the effects that it could have on the budget and purchasing strategies. So I think there are plenty of opportunities ahead of us. And I'll circle back, and I would say that I do believe that there was a significant impact on the actual expenditures in the previous year. Not necessarily impacting what you saw in the budget, but the expenditures. And I would encourage anyone to look at the last few years of the expenditures versus budget for the department.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, thanks. I just feel that, we really should have looked at this a little more carefully, because from what I see from the numbers, we're not being successful at this merger. This is my opinion, but the numbers are there, and they're showing that every year we're going to be losing money. We're not doing it right. So that's my
Okay.
opinion. So
Well, you're entitled to your opinion, but it's not a merger. Just because you call it a merger doesn't make it a merger. It's a shared service agreement. They're very different things. We have not merged with the Peterborough paramedics despite what somebody might be telling you out there. So it's a shared service agreement for the chief and for some of the services that we're doing. We're saving money. I agree with them. Go back and look at some of the previous year's budgets that were under budgeted and overspent. And this is a budget that is much more in line with what we're going to meet. Councillor Richardson, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, I'm basically echoing your same sentiments, realizing that the pressures that the paramedic services has had in the last year with more calls, and also recognizing that the shared boundaries and shared services, it's not just Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, it's Durham as well. I mean, when you are deployed, it's the closest paramedic to the actual call. So I realize it's a new streamlined system that we're working right across the province, and I just want to commend you for the last year and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final questions for the chief before we move on? Councillor Seymour Fagan, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. And through you, thank you, Chief Mello. I just have a question on your staffing because I know that there's a lot of pressures on all the staff with EMS, especially paramedics right now. And I'm wondering how many you have out. I don't know, like, are you going to need to hire? I don't know where you are with that because I know all the other areas are having a very difficult time, especially paramedics.
Through the mayor, so the exact numbers I don't have on my fingertips, but we do have a number of recent retirements. We're seeing probably earlier retirements than we expected. And certainly I think it's associated with the increased pressures during the pandemic. So we have a number of retirements we're in the middle of recruitment for, a number of positions that were being filled by temporary contracts because someone was on a long-term disability. Those are now transitioning into some full-time positions. So we're going to see, I think, a great deal of relief as we get through the holidays and fill some of those positions permanently. The changes in the collective agreement will allow us to have an increased complement of part-time staff as we do some of these non-traditional roles like community paramedicine. So it's, and I really appreciate the work that was done with HR and with the union to do that. I think it will be in a much more stable position in the new year in terms of the staffing. This is not unique to the city of Kawartha Lakes. As you're aware, I'm working with the neighboring service, and the staffing pressures there are equal. I'm also involved with our national association. We're hearing the same thing from Vancouver Island to Gander, Newfoundland. It's in all paramedic services and in all healthcare. We have some amazing staff who have been standing up and meeting all of this head on, but I do see the light on the horizon in terms of our staffing pressures. And of course, that comes with a great deal of very hard work by our HR department, who's trying to help us out with that, with all of the other plates they have spinning. So yeah, it's been tough, but I see a light on the horizon for us.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to give a thank you to all the paramedics out there because I know it has not been easy this last couple of years on them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out to Chief Mello's point about costs. If you look at the actuals for 2020 for total expenses to the budget of 2021, it's down more than $1.2 million. So I think there has been some stabilization there.
Thank you. Any further questions for the chief? Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Have a good day. So page 127 and 128, I don't think we need, unless there's any further questions. We've gone over the police, both police service at our presentations.
On the OPP, when this budget passes, can we get a phone call or a letter to the OPP telling them the budget's been approved so we can get snowmobiles on the trail?
You don't want to wait for snow?
Yeah, probably, but in the past, there's been a gap. So.
Yeah, especially when we approve a budget late, I agree. So can we make a note to just let them know when the budget, if and when the budget passes, that they're good to go with their enforcement on the trails? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, let's go over to Human Services on page 130. Director Sutherland, welcome, sir. So if you want to walk us through your budget starting on page 130, go ahead.
Afternoon, starting on page 130, just a quick overview on the department. As we are provincially designated service manager for human services, the largest contingent of our programs are at the under the direction and regulated by the province, and as such face changes and adjustments throughout the year and year over year to budgets, funding and program requirements at the direction of the province. Just to highlight the four main areas: children's services, as the service manager for the children's services sector, and Ontario Works, the delivery of social assistance under that program. Janine Mitchell is the manager for those program areas. Under housing services, Michelle Corley as housing services manager is primarily responsible for those, with Kirsten Maxwell, who is the new CEO of the Housing Corporation, who presented to you back in October in her area. And Victoria Manor Long-Term Care Home, with Pam Koulis as the executive director, managing city staff over there. In addition, through Human Services is coordinated the funding through the Kawartha Lakes Healthcare Initiative for the doctor recruitment and retention program, our nurse practitioners, as well as funding through to the Haliburton Kawartha Pine Ridge District Health Unit is through the Human Services budget. The pandemic impacts, we've covered a number of times. Just want to highlight the continuing impacts of response in these areas. Cannot be underestimated or understated. Long-term care, I'll talk a little bit more as we get into the budget in terms of staffing there, but there's still very much a response to the pandemic. Highlighted just to highlight to council, there are, I believe, 3 childcare centers with either outbreaks or cases within our community right now of COVID that our staff are helping to manage in terms of the impacts there. I do want to, across all our areas, as I mentioned, the impacts of the pandemic can't be understated, and a continuing thank you to all our staff and all the divisions for their continuing resiliency and commitment through the pandemic to serving our community. On page 131, just to highlight briefly the budget priorities. The brevity of these shouldn't underestimate their scope or their impact. There's a significant amount of change happening across the human services sector, again, largely driven by the province in terms of catching up on a number of changes, as well as responding to community needs. The first, the implementation of provincial modernization initiatives for social assistance and the social assistance programs is a huge scope. It began with the implementation of the employment services service system manager last year, and is continuing probably for the next year or two across the entire social assistance sector, including Ontario Works and the Ontario Disability Support Program. Excuse me. In the housing area, primarily there's the planning and coordination of the affordable housing projects towards pursuing council's affordable housing targets. There's again the pressures in the housing sector, the identification of the housing crisis as being called in a number of areas is big and certainly been highlighted through the pandemic, and we have very much a focus on pursuing and meeting those targets as best we can. The positive indications recently is identified through opportunities at council around some significant developments that may be happening in Lindsay's particular that may present some excellent opportunities towards those goals. The third one I didn't add there was specific to the Victoria Manor and staffing there. As I mentioned, the changes in the sector. The 2 of the 3 main areas within the budget since this budget book was published and presented to council. There's been significant changes in, and I'll cover as I go through, one of which is Victoria Manor, and a sort of reference across the board with recruitment challenges. And Chief Mello was just referring to in terms of his sector. The healthcare sector is facing significant challenge in recruitment with the province's direction and plan to try to pursue long-term care, 4 hours of care, direct care per day per resident in all long-term care homes by 2025. They're looking at, I believe it's in the neighborhood of 20-some thousand new positions being recruited for long-term care. That is going to be a significant challenge for us over the next several years. And I'll speak more to that in just a couple of minutes. The bottom half of that page on the personnel breakdown, there's no changes net over there on the FTE count. Switching over to page 132 on the org chart, again, no changes from the FTE count. Just highlighting again, as with other departments, significant challenges with recruitment, primarily with the impacts of the pandemic across this sector and across the province, as well as with, I would expect the increasing aging of the workforce, especially in the municipal sector, and retirements impacting across the board that we're hearing from our counterparts in other municipalities. To page 133. Quick overview of 3 pressures that we identified in the budget. And again, 2 of the 3 of these have been updated since the budget book was developed. The first one was referencing an increase in childcare. This was actually expected to be implemented for 2021, and late in the budget process last year, the province came out with transitional funding, which offset the increase for 2021. That increase, which is increasing the municipal cost share, was developed or was incorporated into the budget book as it is for children's services, as it was to take effect in January. On Thursday of last week, on December 2nd, we received confirmation writing from the ministry that they are extending transitional funding or giving additional transitional funding for 2022 that will in essence offset that increase. I'll speak to that more in a couple of minutes when I get to that slide. Housing services, there's a specific, the one increase there is primarily the result of reduced federal housing transfers. The funding we receive from the province for housing, which is our primary funding source, is a mixture or a combination of provincial and federal funding. Over the last several years, the federal government has been reducing the funding transfer to the provinces, with the provinces adjusting the funding as it goes. So there is a variance there within this budget, primarily associated with that for 2022. Victoria Manor, I'll speak to more probably when we get to there. At the time of this budget book, we were facing a lot of significant staffing impacts and care impacts for 2022 without knowing what the funding would be. And again, since this time, that has been adjusted. It has been now incorporated into the dollar amounts in the table I'll get to in a couple of minutes, and I'll speak to it a little bit more there. But there is announced in late October was a $4.9 billion long-term care staffing plan and strategy for the province over the next 4 years. Excuse me, switching into pages 134 and 135. This is the high level, the overview of the entire department budget. And just to highlight the overall department budget is just under 59 million. Gross expenses, again, with total revenues at just under 47 million, with a significant portion of that being the provincial grants for the programs. So the net increase for the 2022 budget across all areas is 113,000 from a net impact. A couple areas just to highlight on page 134. There's the one line at the bottom, professional fees. The way the Victoria Manor budget is done and rolled up is that that line includes all the entire budget for Victoria Manor. So there is a gross, excuse me, increase of 815,000 for Victoria Manor and gross expenses, but it is now being offset by new revenue. Excuse me, page 135, and just note on, there was a question, I believe, from Councillor Dunn regarding the, about halfway down, the 1.9 million increase under the transfer to external for OW clients is the anticipated caseload increase for 2022. Those expenses are 100% subsidized by the province. So while there is a gross increase in the gross increase of just under the 2 million, that is fully offset by provincial grants as well. There's page 136.
Sorry, Director. Sorry, Director. Councillor Dunn has a follow-up. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I recognize that it is fully funded by the Ontario government. I am concerned, and it's just a comment, that we have a 10% increase in calls for service for Ontario Works. That, to me, is a pretty dramatic thing year over year, that's all.
I would agree in part based on the 2021 budget and a combination with the pandemic. We don't really know exactly what that would be. It's probably on the excuse me, I'm just joking, on the higher end. With the end of the federal benefits, especially, there's the federal emergency response benefits, and the information we had from the province with those ending in October, we were what they were calling a surge in benefits. That surge estimates is what drove that number. What we're seeing is not as much as was potentially forecast. It's probably at a high end, so it may be lower, but we'll have to see as recovery and broader community recovery and provincial recovery happens.
Okay, we're good. Go ahead. Keep going.
All right. Page 136. We're into the just the divisional org charts here for the what's identified as the here as the Ontario Works, but as the broader under the social services division area, which actually incorporates both Ontario Works and the children's services staff as well are incorporating that org chart. Page 137. This is the Ontario Works delivery, which is more than just traditionally has been called the administration or delivery budget, but also incorporates a significant portion of benefits, life stabilization benefits for clients, formerly the employment supports, which is virtually status quo at $12,000 net across the division variance there. Page 138. A short line, but one of the biggest budgets. This is the program. This is the combination of all the benefits and payments under the Ontario Works program to clients and the various benefits. Again, the total increase there, 1.8 million in benefit costs, but there's actually a zero variance. It's showing on that page. It was a typo. The $1.791 million variance is actually zero there, just to confirm that. Page 139, the childcare programs. So this was, as you see, there's an increase there, total net increase of $90,000 with the new funding that was announced on Thursday last week, confirmed. That variance, that $90,000 can be reduced to zero. So we're actually, with the additional income, actually it'll be a slight positive variance there. I'm not sure if the treasurer has confirmed in terms of how that would affect the overall city budget here, but that 90,000 increase with that new transitional funding can be offset to create a zero, at least a zero variance. The contributions to healthcare at the bottom side, or bottom half of that page, excuse me, includes the funding to the health unit under the external clients transfer, as well as the healthcare initiative North Lakes Healthcare Initiative for Doctor Recruitment Reserve, Doctor Recruitment Program. So page 140, Nurse Practitioner Program at the top, and Victoria Manor, the bottom half. So as I mentioned earlier with Victoria Manor, the overall increase in expenses is a little over 800,000 in expenses has increased. With the funding allocation we received last month, of that $4.9 billion that the province announced over the next 4 years, we received allocations, notional allocations for the fiscal years, including our current 2021-22 fiscal year, right through to 2024-25. We know what our notional allocations will be. We don't know exactly what we will receive each year because it will be dependent on our staffing levels. So we do have goals over the next 4 years by March 31st, 2022, 23, 24, and 25 to increase our total hours of direct care to residents per day up to that 4 by 2025, with those allocations for the next 4 years somewhat corresponding to our achievement of those goals. The exact calculation and the process to get that funding and report on it is still being clarified by the province. As you know, Sienna Senior Living manages the home for us. On a call with them last week, they're still working, especially to get a number of details from the ministry, because it's not quite clear how that will be reported. So we need to know that, obviously, how we build our plan over the next several years. In terms of the staffing, the Victoria Manor org chart is not included. It was not referenced earlier, as it is managed by Sienna, but all the staff, other than the administrator, are city employees. But to meet our targets of target of the 4 hours of care by 2025, we know that we will be hiring in excess of, well, I would say several dozen new staff, direct care staff, over the next few years. Again, there's a number of questions with that in terms of which positions cover. Right now, it's identified as personal support workers, registered practical nurses, and registered nurses only. There's some other support staff that there's discussions with the ministry in terms of recognizing them as direct care as well. So what we did for this 2022 budget is include an allocation of that new funding, a somewhat conservative level, but it is an arbitrary figure of an additional $1 million was added to our 2022 budget. That results in that net variance, a positive variance actually of 223,000. Based on a notional allocation, that could be higher next year, the actual revenue. But we do have a significant amount of work to do in terms of developing a specific staffing strategy, a staffing plan, including retention of existing employees, as well as recruitment of new staff, that to meet the goals of that funding program. So this budget is presented based on what we realistically expect we will be able to achieve, but we don't know precisely what those staffing impacts will be, and what we will have to continue to report through to the Committee of Management as that staffing plan is developed and implemented, through to the committee management and or to council as well as we move along. That was where we ended up with this allocation of additional funding for 2022. With that, page 141, the Community Social Investment Fund, there's no changes in that program at all. And page 142 is the Housing Services, Housing Division budget, which also incorporates, you notice the page 142, the Housing Corporation, where the CEO fits there as well. All the positions within the Housing Corporation are city employees directly. And the Housing Services budget on page 143, again referencing, there is an increase there, net increase due to the changes in provincial federal funding transfers primarily. Or just reference the difference in housing compared to say social services. It's not a direct cost share around like administration costs and staffing costs. It's not a direct formula for delivery costs. So year over year, there's various programs that do come along that contribute to administrative related costs, including staffing, but they'll fluctuate year over year, and we will be able to access administrative allocations from some of those pots to offset some of these. But it is not subject to the same cost share as the social services division. So it's a little bit more dynamic. And page 144, part of the housing division, as well the homelessness, direct homelessness services budget, which there's shows us a $3 variance. I believe is probably a typo or a rounding error, but is basically a status quo there in terms of the budget. That's it. If any questions, happy to answer.
Thanks, Director. One quick question. At the beginning, you mentioned a late funding announcement for children's services. Did I miss that? How does that change the budget in front of us? Or did you go through that and I missed it?
I referenced it. I may have gone over quickly. Page 139. The top half, the childcare programs, right now is listed in the budget book as a $90,000 net increase. So that new funding will fully offset that 90,000.
So because of that funding, the tax support required of 90,000 can be reduced?
Correct. Additional revenue will change that. The $90,000 variance will be zero.
Thank you. And is that a reduction in the tax levy to the treasurer? Is that a question to the treasurer?
Yes. The actual difference, Rod, would be a little bit more than 90,000. It would be 122,493, would it not?
Correct. That's the additional
revenue
under that line. So that net variance, that's what this came through yesterday, would actually create the variance, a positive variance, a reduction, I believe, of about 32,000.
So it will reduce the tax levy by $122,493.
Okay, thank you. And I don't suppose the typo on page 138 finds us an extra $1.8 million in the budget, right? Just asking. Would have been nice. Just saying, yeah. Any questions for Director Sutherland on anything to do with human services there? Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Rod. I think what we'll do is we got Public Works next, which is quite a large department. So why don't we take a quick 5-minute break, come back at 2:45. 5 minutes. Councillor O'Reilly, you got that? And 2:45, we're going to get back at it and we'll finish it off. Thank you. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Page 146, a Public Works overview. So Director Robinson, are you hanging in there with us? There you are. Welcome, sir. If you want to start on page 146 and work us through the proposed budget, go ahead.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to council, here to present the Public Works operating budget for 2022. Quick overview of the department. Department's responsible to lead, manage, and implement designated functions within the city. We have 6 divisions within our group: roads operations, water, wastewater operations, solid waste, landfill services, fleet services, and transit services. We've already had a discussion on the water wastewater operating budget earlier today. It's been approved. So within the next few slides, we're going to be talking about the other 5 divisions within our group. I don't think council needs a lot further clarification on what our individual operating divisions do. So with that said, we'll move forward into discussion on the budget. With page 147 is our budget priorities. So again, we're looking to ensure health and safety of staff and public in the delivery of efficient services. We continually strive to improve and implement effective operations. Delivery of operations in accordance with council direction. So we have a number of council level of service policies and provincial documents that support our operational activity on a regular basis. We manage the fiscal and operating impact of the pandemic. When we look at the delivery of transit operations, especially, there was a significant impact to how that service was delivered and led. Continue to review fleet in accordance with council policies and accompanying management directive. So again, that's a non-emergency fleet that is managed through our fleet division within Public Works. Continuing to strategically manage the water wastewater infrastructure, and then waste services program, again, focusing on public education, diversion, are the primary goals for an operational side of waste services through 2022. Moving to page 148, you can see our divisional breakdown. So we have 3.05. Again, there's another 0.05 for consideration of council for increase in positions. The 2.05 are transit driver positions supporting the expansion of a 4th route proposed for the fall of 2022. And the 1.0 within the waste division is a position supporting the continuing education and promotion of the waste division within the city. So I can go through and explain that a little bit further if there want. I know there was a question related to that, so I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if you wanted to address that now or later.
Yeah, just on 149, I know Councillor Dunn had a question about the transit drivers. I'm pretty sure your answer was straightforward. It's what he wanted to know, but go ahead.
My favorite kind of answer. Question is the increase in transit hours a result of increased routes and coverage? Answer, yes.
Try to keep it short and sweet for you, Councillor. There was another question from Councillor Dunn about the waste reduction coordinator position that's also proposed. There was a response provided in the Q&A. I wonder if there's any further questions about that or no.
No, Councillor's good with that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So moving back into the document, so that was 148 into 149 is our org chart. Similar to community services, the department is quite a robust department, so it's broken into 2 different pages. So on this page, you can see the roads operations and fleet and transit divisions with the supporting resources for that group. And on page 150, again, you'll see the water wastewater group and the environmental services group being the waste division support on that group. Moving forward into the department overview, again, I won't go through the high level at the top. Council's there for the review. If there's any questions, by all means ask. With respect to the individual divisions and department costs, go through, it's probably easier to break that down. Page 151 and 152 and 153 is the whole department rolled into one budget. So again, difficult to explain the individual department or divisional costs related to that budget. So if we shift down to Page 154, it starts to break those out. You'll take a look at the Public Works Administration Department, which is really myself, the executive assistant, and the supporting staff. There's 7 administrative assistants that report to the executive assistant. The individual staff or the administrative assistant staff, their costs or their budget rolls into those individual departments. So within the actual page 155, which is the department overview, it's just the myself and the EA that are part of that group. And again, it's a straightforward salary and wages adjustment and some small adjustments related to activity to match exact or historical spending. 156 starts to look at roads and bridges. So again, you can take a look at the org chart on 156. 157 breaks into the breakdown for roads specifically. You can see there are increases related to salaries, wages, and benefits. Materials and supplies and services, again, that's our contracted services and so on. Contracts for supply of services, culverts, guide rails, those types of activities. This is probably the largest increase that you'll see anywhere within our budget is under contracted services within roads. You'll see almost a $700,000 increase there. There's a program for replacement of culverts where historically we've made requests through that kind of special projects budget. It's been recognized that there's a continual need for an enhanced level of investment into our thousands and thousands of culverts that we have across the municipality. So we've identified some pretty significant needs on that and are requesting an increase in that budget line. It is under contracted services because a lot of the culverts that we're identifying are pushing the limits of our operational resources for depth and size and so on. So we're looking to make that increase primarily in contracted services. We'll continue to manage culvert maintenance and replacement within our operational budget as well, but the primary budget is being requested through contracted services. You'll see additional costs through interfunctional adjustments. Within that, again, you'll see costs such as human resource contributions, IT, and probably the biggest increase to this one here would be fleet costs. So adjustments to fleet costs will be reflected through that interfunctional adjustment. At the bottom of the page, winter control. You can see, the relative adjustments there on salaries, material and contract, and so on and so forth. And the netting result there is a budget very similar to what we had in 2021.
Director, Councillor Dunn, you had a question about contracted services on 157. Did you get the clarification you were looking for?
Thank you.
Okay, we're good. Go ahead, Director. Thanks.
Thank you. Page 158, we look at our fleet and transit division org chart. Very simple org chart with that group. Moving into page 159 is the operational budget supporting that group. Looking at a slight reduction in projected revenues from user fees, and that is that's licensing costs and so on. So we're looking at a reduction in that as well. When we look at salaries, again, minor adjustments to salaries, you'll see significant changes here within material contract supply and contracted services. Materials, that's where you'll see the bulk of that cost is projected increases to fuel. As everybody has seen, the fuel at the pump is continuing to climb. When we prepare this budget last summer, the rates were down somewhat. So we've got a substantial increase there, and we're optimistic if rates start to continue to hold that we may have enough money in there, but that line item is already going to be difficult as it is to manage. And contracted services is, as everybody's seen, the price of pretty well everything is increased. So when we start looking at parts and equipment for repair and maintenance of our fleet, we're seeing those costs climb as well. And again, the continued adjustments for the interfunctional adjustments as well. Moving forward into our transit division, again, that's where we see the increase for the transit drivers, the 2.05 FTE. They will be part-time drivers to support the expansion of that transit service. Moving into the financial, the budget for that department, Again, you'll see some adjustments to the revenues. That is to bring the projected revenues in line with what we've seen from historical. You can see the wages increase for the salary for those two positions. Materials are, again, just general adjustments for those based on historical spend and what we're seeing in the marketplace. Slight reduction in contracted services there as well. And what you see from just trying to take a better look at where the adjustments for the contracted services are coming from. I believe it's related to the maintenance and so on of the routes as well. And then again, some adjustments for interfunctional adjustment as well. So
Just have a question there, Director, before you move on. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Sure.
Thank you. Under revenues, is the other revenues, are those ticket sales for people riding the buses?
Yeah, there's a number of revenues that support our transit operations. There's ticket sales, there's advertising sales, there's grants and from the federal and provincial government. So there's a number of things that feed into that line.
Do you roughly know what our ticket sales are per year? Or is that something, I don't need it today, but I'd be interested to know what our ticket sales are.
Yeah, I can let the councillor know right now through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. We do break down our estimated amounts for ticket sales, token sales, bus fares, etc. So traditional passenger cash fares are estimated about $46,000. Token sales, another $7,300. Token sales through the machine, another $9,200. And then there's also passes, so transit passes for senior adults and so on, totaling a little over $20,000. So those, all those combine to feed into the revenues for transit.
Okay, go ahead.
Great. The next slide, page 162, is the organizational chart for our waste management division. Again, there you'll see the waste reduction coordinator role identified on the org chart. When we start to look at the detailed budget for that division, again, you'll see adjustments to revenues. Revenues within that group, again, there's a lot of provincial, federal grants and funding that's available for that group. We take advantage of those offers when we can to support the operations of the division. You can see some adjustments to wages related to the position. Materials and supply have been able to reduce that budget to align with historical spending. You'll see increases in contracted services. Primarily that increase is related to CPI increase on our significant large contract for waste collection services. And then some other minor adjustments there as well. So that's the general overview for waste. And I believe that brings us to the end of the Public Works tax base budget.
Okay, any questions for the Director on Public Works? Any area of Public Works? Seeing none, thank you, Director, appreciate it.
Welcome.
Okay, we've gone through our operating budget. Every department, is there any questions, anything we missed? Okay, so let's go over we have a couple of decision units. And before we start the decision units, I have a request from Councillor Ashmore to add, you probably saw it in an email, to add some tax relief for the Omemee Medical Center Board of Directors, or Omemee Medical Center tax relief to be added as a decision unit. And what we'll do is we'll get the councillor, if he wants to make a motion, to see if council will include it as a decision unit, and if they will, when we're done the other decision units, we'll make a decision on it. So do you want to speak to it, councillor?
Yes, please. I'd like to move that I would have this placed. It could be discussed at the last, because it's at the back of the queue here. So just so I could get this on for discussion after we get the other ones dealt with, please.
Tax relief of $3,674 for the Omimi Medical Center as a decision unit.
Actually, it's 50% of the annual property taxes. And if you look at the attachment, I started this in 2019 here. So this was, back in 2019, it was, the taxes were $14,654. So we'll assume it's 15,000. So I would say it's around 7,000. We'll say 7,500.
So you're proposing a decision unit for tax relief of $7,500 for the Omimi Medical Center for 2022.
Yes, please.
Moved by, and this is to put it as a decision unit. Moved by Councillor Ashmore, second by Councillor Yeo. Any questions? I guess I have a question. Why this medical center and why not all our medical centers? What's different about this one?
Okay, well, we're going to be talking about a significant budget item here with the Ross Memorial Hospital. I felt this would be good afterwards because it is a hospital. It's a mini hospital. It's a clinic, and I feel that it's worthy of discussion. This very, very small amount compared to what we're going to be contemplating in the next few minutes here. So I think it's just to be fair to the folks in Omimi, all the good they've done, all the hard work they've put everything into it, that they at least be heard. And if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. But I just would like to get it on as a decision unit, if I could, please.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on moving it over as a decision unit for later discussion? Call the question, all in favor? And that's passed. Okay, done. It's over there. Okay, so let's go operating decision units. So are there any, before I go through these, are there any other decision units that council wants to contemplate adding to the operating budget as we just did with Councillor Ashmore before we go through what we have here? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Ross Memorial Hospital. So we got a letter earlier in the year. They've got a capital campaign. They're trying to raise $15 million. They're asking the municipality for between $5 and $7 million as a donation as part of their capital campaign. Operations are covered by provincial funding. Capital portions of the hospital, capital funding for the hospital is not. That's why they have a foundation. I have a comment I'll make, and you can do what you wish, council. I think this council should consider making a one-time donation because we're at the end of our term. I do not think this council should lock in a 5-year payment or something if council chooses to do that and commit the next council. I think we should ask for a follow-up motion that a report, if we decide to donate to the hospital or not, that a follow-up report come back to the new council and then let them have a discussion about their term of council if they want to make an annual levy or repayment. But my opinion, this council shouldn't be committing the next council to an ongoing donation for the hospital. So we've thrown around with staff, that there is some funding in our contingency reserve. Between $1 to $2 million could be made as a donation. A one-time donation if this council wishes to do that. So I would propose, if somebody wants to move, that the 2022 operating budget be amended to include a $1 million donation to the Ross Memorial Hospital, and that donation be funded, the $1 million from the general contingency reserve, including $400,000 of pandemic funding, which is already included in this reserve. So it's the $400,000 of the pandemic funding, $600,000 out of the contingency reserve, gives a one-time donation, and then the next council can deal with. You'll move that, Councillor Richardson? Are you seconding that? Councillor Helmsley, thank you. I've pretty much spoken to it, so I'm not gonna dwell on it. I think it's fair. I know not everybody thinks that way with funding. There's always an argument that the hospital is provincial funding, but it's been made pretty clear that capital costs are not covered by the province. And I think this is a good end-of-term donation for this council out of a reserve that, that we've had some surpluses in past years. And then the next council can come forward with what they want, what they choose to do, if they choose to do anything further in the long run. So you moved it, Councillor Richardson. Do you want to speak to it?
No, I feel like you've summed up everything. It's a cornerstone to our community. It supports our community, and I think at this time, it's just the proper decision, so I support it.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree. This is an institution that everybody in the city uses, and it's only appropriate that we give them help when they need help. I'm not going to talk about the senior levels of government and their inability to step forward and do what they're supposed to do in terms of health care. But I would say that we need to look after our own citizens, and this is a way of doing it. I agree we shouldn't burden future councils with making a multi-year commitment, and they can do that as they choose. I think that $1 million speaks a lot towards our value to the Ross Memorial Hospital, and I think it's the right thing to do, and let's go forward and do it.
Thank you. Councillor Riley?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. A lot's been said. I think, especially with what the hospital and the community's gone through, in particular in the last 2 years, was a pandemic, and I think it's certainly been provided a wonderful service, whether it's at the fairgrounds or at the Ross. And we're a growing community, and we have to support it going forward. And even though it's mentioned other levels of government, but I think it's appropriate at this time and not to encumber another council.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Call the question then. All in favor? And that's passed. Okay, our next operating decision is decision unit. Councillor Richardson, you had a decision unit about digital speed signs considered in the rural communities as part of the traffic calming program. $3,000 per sign. I know that we've had some conversations since then. Councillor Vail brought forward a motion about the police to let's get the signs installed, see if the police can, are you okay with that for now? And we'll just leave this one be?
Nope, this is perfect. We'll receive it as information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other, we're good on that? Okay. And then decision unit for the Lindsay Business Improvement Agency, which is Community Department Development Fund, additional $10,000 requested for additional beautification costs due to reconstruction. If council wishes to proceed with this item, a $10,000 increase would be required to the 2022 CPDF program, and I assume funded out of the tax levy, correct? Councillor Dunn, you'll move that? Moved by Councillor Dunn, seconded by Councillor O'Reilly. Do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, we have a partnership with the BIA where we share cost of beautifications downtown with the BIA on a 50-50 basis. And it's been 50-50 forever, except for the last 3 or 4 years. We found it wasn't enough, so the BIA added an extra $10,000. So it became 30 from the city, 40 from the BIA. Last year we made a request. It wasn't in the budget, but the BIA got their $10,000 anyway, and hopefully I'm not putting words in Director Shank's mouth, but he gave us the $10,000 to bring us up to the $40,000 each. We anticipated that it was going to be included in this year's budget. Somehow it wasn't. And basically, we're just asking that we add the $10,000 and bring it back up to the 50-50 split.
So that motion should have been that the 2022 operating budget be amended to include $10,000 for additional beautification in the Lindsay BIA area, funded from the tax levy.
That's right.
And that was moved by you, second. So my understanding was this was the one that was, and I don't know, maybe CEO, this was the one that was funding, that the 10,000 was in the MLEO last year as part of that, and that's why we didn't need to, and then this year it was taken out, and if we want to continue with the program, it needs to be added here. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Last year was a one-time sort of top-up of 10,000. We funded it from a surplus budget in MLEL. This year, they're still asking for another $10,000 top-up to their overall programming. It's just in a different area of the budget now, and the proper area of the budget going forward.
That would make sense, because I didn't know where the money came from. I knew that the BAA got it. I just assumed that it came from Director Shank's budget, but that's fine. He's happy he didn't have to give away $10,000. Anyway, I would hope that it would be added into the budget and on an ongoing basis. It's just become the new number.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley?
I wonder, do you want to say? Okay. Is this area rated? No? So doesn't the BIA get money because they run their organization, but the businesses are taxed and the money goes to the businesses, to the BIA? Is that not the way it works?
I'll let Councillor Dunn speak, but part of it is funded from the tax levy, but we have matching funds that we do as well, so go ahead.
Yeah, the BIA has a special levy for the BIA members. They also pay regular taxes to the city, just like everybody else in town. The city has always recognized that they have a responsibility, just like they do in every other town, for beautification, for decoration, for putting up signs and so on and so forth. So the agreement the BIA and the city came to whenever, at least 20 years ago, we've been around for 21 years now, at least 21 years ago, they came to the agreement that they would split the cost of beautification on a 50-50 basis. Because the BIA, who manages the money, it's flow through, but they manage the expenditures on a budget that is scrutinized by city staff. They recognize that that wasn't enough over the last couple of years, so the BIA, out of their levy, increased the levy by an additional $10,000. Last year, they asked the city to match that $10,000, which the city did. They're just asking now that it be included as a permanent part of the budget.
So if I'm correct, other municipalities, we have to go through the 50-50 funding process for our beautification. We put out 50% and then we apply through the beautification program. Do they not have that ability to apply through the beautification program? I know it's a maximum, I think it's a maximum of 7,500, but I'm just curious.
This has been built in as a one-of, and I guess if other communities had BIAs, that they could probably come up with a similar arrangement. But this is a recognized body of the city, and the agreements that the city and that recognized body. I'm going to say we're a committee of council, but I'm not exactly sure what our official designation is. But the recognition is that this committee, called the BIA, has come together with Community Services, and they've reached this 50-50. But it's the same idea as beautification. But even regardless of that, the city does do beautification anyway. They do it on their own dime without a 50-50. So, you know, I'll use the parks as an example. They plant flowers in the parks, and they do that as part of their regular business plan. I didn't realize until I actually read it that we were funded under the Community Department of Development. I didn't even realize that's where the funding came from. I just knew it came from Community Services. But rather than bearing the full cost, rather than the city bearing the full cost, the BIA is standing up and spending 50% of the cost. And we get an enhanced level of beautification too. I mean, we're not doing it for nothing, or they're not doing it for nothing, but there's an enhanced level, but yes.
My only concern is that other municipalities, we don't get flowers planted in the park by Parks and Rec. We have horticulture societies or others who do that for us. And then we augment with hanging baskets downtown from the 50-50 beautification fund. So it's just, I'm a little concerned about it. I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I'm just a little concerned about it.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, I didn't get you to speak to it as a seconder. Do you have anything you want to add?
So Dunn covered it.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Yeo?
Thank you, and through you. As far as I'm concerned, the Lindsay BIA and the city's commitment to them has always been in the reports from the Beautification Fund, as far as I can remember. It's always been a partnership, and I've been here probably almost as long as it's been going on, I guess. But I have no problem with increased costs and upping it by $10,000. And I think next year, perhaps this council, one of the last things should maybe look at all their partnership funds with the community, because costs are rising for them as well. And going forward might be a good idea to raise them all across the board, but that's for another day. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Do you want to sum up?
I'm going to shut up while I'm ahead.
That's like an answer to that question, yes. Same thing, we're getting there. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. So then that takes us to our last decision that we have from Councillor Ashmore regarding the Omemee Medical Center. Go ahead. What is your request, sir? Make a motion.
Yeah. I'll make a motion that council approve a one-time contribution of $7,500 to the Omemee Medical Center. And if I can get a seconder, I'd like to speak to it, please.
Funded from the tax levy?
Yes, please, tax levy.
Tax levy funding, $7,500, one-time funding for the Omemee Medical Center. Moved by Councillor Ashmore, second. Councillor Dunn? Yep.
I'm going to second it because I got a whole bunch of questions, and so for...
We'll let him speak to it,
Yep.
and then we'll come to you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to put this on, and council for letting me at least get it on as a decision unit. First thing I wanted to do was just read this letter, if I could. It's not very long, but it's the following. Addressed to myself, the request for property tax relief for the tax roll number of the Omemee Medical Center. Thank you for speaking with me this morning, and I was speaking to Barry Marr below, the President and Chair of the Board of Directors, regarding the Omemee Medical Center, or OMC, we'll call it from now on, request for property tax relief. The OMC operates a community health center that provides medical health and support services for the general public located in the village of Omemee. Background, in the early 2000s, Omemee Hydro was sold to Hydro One, which was mandated as part of the amalgamation of the townships and communities of Victoria County, now known as the City Kawartha Lakes. The funds from the sale, the Omemee Community Hydroelectric Systems Transfers, or CHESS Fund, could only be used for charitable or non-profit initiatives. At that time, the only family physician in Omemee was retiring, and it became the community's vision to ensure access to local health care was maintained. The owners of the former Regal property severed a portion of their land to support the community's vision. This donated land became the impetus for building a facility to support the vision, and through community engagement and council support, a board of directors was formed to build a medical facility and recruit primary care providers. The 3,000 square foot facility was completed in 2008 when Dr. Ludwig saw his first patient. Request for property tax relief. As a not-for-profit corporation, the Omemee Medical Center is once again reaching out for council support by way of an annual property tax relief. Now, it's annual, I'm asking for a one-time here. And we discussed that, so this is one time. OMC's main source of revenue is through lease agreements with primary care providers and generous donations. After 13 years in operation, OMC remains in a stable and financial position despite having experienced lengthy tenant vacancies over the years. Right now they have 2 doctors and 1 nurse practitioner, so they're pretty well, they could use one more, but they're doing good right now. Balancing monthly lease increases with increasing primary care local has proven difficult. More than ever, the healthcare close to home is vital for our community, especially during the challenging times of COVID-19 pandemic. OMC adapted its facilities to the pandemic, normal including having to replace expensive equipment such as regulated vaccine fridges. The Omemee Medical Center Board of Directors respectfully requests that a 50% of its annual property taxes grant. Thank you for your consideration. So the Omimi Medical Center, it takes in a large catchment area. It's not just the village of Omimi proper. It goes upwards to people from Dunsford come, people from Bethany, Rayboro, towards Fowler's Corners. It takes in a big geographical area. And never before have they ever come to council asking for support. They've done this through the Legacy Chest Fund and through donors. They don't have a foundation, but they have a wall of donors, and which was incredible how they raised these funds to get this medical center going. And just to be clear, it's not a medical trust. It's a not-for-profit organization, which is a big difference. So they're asking for just the one-time support from council, and this would really help their bottom line. They're looking at hopefully hiring another doctor if they can, or a nurse practitioner, but right now they have 2 doctors and 1 nurse practitioner and 2 staff. Plus they have life labs that come in for laboratory work twice a week, once a week. So they're an integral part of the healthcare system, especially in Omimi and area, a huge geographical area, and they're asking for our support today. So I would appreciate your support if we could do this for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, go ahead. You seconded it?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the councillor, what's the difference between the medical center in Omimi and the medical center that my doctor's in? My doctor's in, and they have a life lab there, and they have a pharmacy, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure the people that run the place try to make a profit. So I guess my 2 questions are, is what's the difference, and what happens if, in fact, the Omimi Medical Center does generate a profit? What happens to that money? So those are my 2 questions, if I can get an answer.
Thank you for the question. So it's a not-for-profit. If your doctor or health professional, your nurse practitioner, whatever, is located in a for-profit, there are several medical centers around who are private, but the Ross Memorial Hospital, the Omimi Medical Center, and of course the new Cobeconk Wellness Center, they're examples of not-for-profit, and that's the difference. Like, they're not, if they do make a profit, well, you know, it'll go right back into the facilities. It'll certainly won't be going to anything else other than the facility itself. So that money stays there in the community. It stays in that medical center if they do turn a profit. But they've been up to date on their taxes. They've always paid their bills, and they've been a great asset to the community. So they're just asking for the one-time assistance.
I had a follow-up with the director, and it triggered from the question you had, Councillor Vaile, earlier. We had a report on this earlier in the year, last year, I don't remember, because you brought this up before. And we had a report came forward about that there is relief available for medical centers through MPAC. Some tax relief against property taxes, but they have to, and I believe you mentioned that you sent the Omimi Medical Center the contact, the information, how to apply. Do you know if they ever applied for that? Because that was a process actually available to all medical centers, right?
Yeah, through the mayor. So the report came November 3rd of 2020, and it requires, if you are a not-for-profit medical center, you can apply through MPAC for tax relief. The only requirement is that you're not-for-profit and that you have a charter. To answer your question, MPAC has not heard from the Omimi Medical Center.
So you followed up with MPAC and they never received an application from the Omimi Medical Center?
Yes, we confirmed with them today.
Okay. Well, that's unfortunate. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
I guess my questions are along the same line, that there are many of these medical centers. There's Coworth and North in both Fenelon and Bobcaygeon, and there is, I believe there's one in Kirkfield as well. That may be a little Woodville, okay, and maybe that's a little different, I don't know. But I don't understand, in the letter it says they're financially stable, so I'm not sure why they need help, number one, and secondly, I don't know what 1 year's 50% stipend from the city would do to help them out, other than reduce their tax bill. And if we were going to do it, I wouldn't be happy with it on the tax levy. I would do it from a reserve of some kind, but I'm kind of leaning towards not doing it because I don't see why these other medical centers won't come forward looking for help as well, except that they may be in rented facilities rather than owned facilities. So I think it's a slippery slope, and I think that if we do it once, we're going to have to do it many, many, many times.
No, and I'll get you to sum up, Councillor. Is there any other questions? I'm going to, go ahead, Councillor Riley.
No, just somewhat along the same lines, we're not only medical centers, we get all these small community centers. I know in our community, for example, in Valencia, we went out, we bought the church, we have the community center, we raise all our money, we do it, it facilitates the whole area out there, and I know that there's a number of community centers, 3 or 4, that actually get their taxes reduced already. But ours, for whatever reason, doesn't qualify, so be it. But anyway, so I just think that, I haven't made my mind up, but I'm not sure that there are a lot of small community centers that are surviving on their own and have to survive on their own as well, too.
Yeah, and I'm just going to speak to it. I'm not going to support it. I know it's not a whole lot of money, but I find it kind of disappointing that, you know, you brought a memo forward and staff did a report giving the medical center an avenue on how they could apply. If they'd applied through MPAC and been turned down and they were in dire financial straits, you know what, it's not a lot of money and we could consider it, but the fact that they didn't even receive an application means, number one, the director did a report for nothing, trying to give some guidance to the medical center. So I don't think they've exhausted some of the avenues that they need to exhaust first before coming to this council. And maybe if they do that and they want to come back to this council later in the year, early next year, at some point next year, then like I say, it's not a ton of money. We do have some reserves, but I think they need to pursue some other avenues first before I can support it. But any other questions before I get you to sum up? Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you. Just clarification. So it's not a medical trust, and that's why they didn't apply for it. And looked at the clock here. In less than 2 minutes, we approved $1 million for 3 pieces of paper that we got from the hospital. We approved $1 million, just like that. And I'm asking for, not me, the people in Omimi that are running this, asked for $7,500. I mean, really, I mean, let's comprehend this whole thing. I really think we need to look at this. I mean, they've worked hard and they set a track record, a good track record in the community. And when somebody comes in with 3 pieces of paper and asks for $1 million and they get it like that, like, I don't think that's right. But anyways, I'm asking for your support for this small community who is asking for just a one-time. They're not going to ask it for it every year, like the one we just approved. We're asking for a one-time donation of $7,500. Appreciate your support.
Thank you. Everybody clear on the motion? Call the question. All in favor? Motion fails. Okay, are there any other decision units anyone's proposing for the operating budget? Seeing none. Caroline, I would be curious as to, the way I see it, we got 60,000 from the tax levy, then we took off 122,493, then we added 10,000 for the BIA. And I think that should be a reduction in 172,493. Can you, no?
Sorry, I just have been communicating back with Janine Mitchell, as she has told me that the amount that can be reduced from the childcare is only 90,000. So we've got to factor that in.
Okay, so if you factor the 90,000 plus the 60,000, 150, I think you have to take off 10,000 for the BIA, which was tax levy that we added, correct? So that's 140. See, I could be an accountant. So where we started, 4.71, and despite what the press says, that includes the 1.5% infrastructure levy that we already passed at capital budget. So can you give us an update based on these decisions where we are right now?
So with the reduction of 140,000, we're sitting at 4.6%.
I have an idea. I think, our target that we put forward was, it's just my opinion, guys. This target we put forward was 3% operating budget with the 1.5% capital roads levy, which I think is a great idea. I know that adds to the total, but it is separate. I would propose that maybe we offset the 3% and the 1.5 to get us to 4.5, so the 0.1% be taken from the contingency reserve to bring us to 4.5%, which is our original target, and after all that, that's the budget we proposed. How much would that be just exactly, would we, just for clarification?
It would be 120,000.
And, hang on, and what's our balance in the contingency reserve after the hospital?
The uncommitted balance in the contingency reserve after the hospital would be
2.2 million?
A little more than 2.2, because we did the 400 from
So we're-
pandemic, so.
So the 100 and some isn't gonna turn
Yeah,
us too upside
2.6,
down,
yep.
so. Yes,
I'll make that motion.
so that we,
Approve the operating budget at
3% operating plus the 1.5%
1.5
capital levy,
contingency and 120,000 from the reserve.
contingency reserve to offset the tax levy. Moved by Councillor Helmsley. Did you have a question, Councillor Yeo, or you want to second it? Okay, I'm going to get a seconder first. Councillor Richardson, thank you. Go ahead.
Just so I'm clear and understand it, the 1.5% levy is attributed to every household in the city. The 3% operating budget is a average residential tax increase?
The 3% tax levy is the culmination of all the increases, so the general levy and the area rating. So it's the increase to the budget, not necessarily what the resident sees.
Right, okay, that's fine, that's all I wanted to clarify, so, thank you. And I will speak in support of the budget.
And the 1.5% levy that we've already, capital roads infrastructure levy that we've already approved is across the entire, all
Correct.
residents in the municipality, correct?
It'll be taxed similar to the general levy, so across the board.
Did you want to speak to it? No, I guess. Any other questions, comments? Go ahead.
Just briefly, I think we've done what we set out to do. We said we were going to do a 3% and a 1.5% levy, and that's where we are now. We've been able to put in a couple of decision units that make some sense, and I think that I think it's a good budget, and we'll get a lot done in 2022. So let's go.
Okay, so we need a motion, we need to approve the motion to reduce that from the contingency reserve. So that's the motion on the floor. All in favor? That's passed. So then, any other comments, questions? So then we need a motion that council approve the 2022 operating budget as amended with a tax levy increase of 4.5%, including a 1.5% dedicated roads capital levy. Is that the motion you're looking for? Okay, that's where we're at. Councillor Riley, you'll move that. Second by Councillor Vale. Any final questions, comments? All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Okay, you got your budget for 2022. Need a confirming bylaw. Bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special meeting of council of December 7th, 2021. Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor Richardson. All in favor? That's passed. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Yeo with a smile, seconded by Councillor Dunn. All in favor? That's passed. And a reminder, next week's council meeting, our last council meeting of the year, starts at 12:30. Special council meeting for the housing annual meeting. So Be ready. Be ready. 12:30, and then our regular council meeting starts at 1. Thanks, folks. Yeah, thank you.